Happy Friday afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Keeney, joined by Matthew Fish, and we welcome you all to another MSP Cyber Roundtable. If you haven't already, make sure you check out last week's webinar on YouTube. We had Chris Johnson from CompTIA and Steve Alexander from MSP Ignite on for a conversation about what makes a real cyber victory. If you're new to the roundtable this week, make sure you check out our educational video library on YouTube and like us on LinkedIn. Today we have James Abercrombie joining us from Acronis for a conversation around disaster recovery planning. We'll do full introductions in a moment, but first, how's everybody doing today?
Loving Friday. It's almost the weekend, so just enjoying the rest of the day.
I want to finish that Hot Topic conversation.
Oh, we're going back to Hot Topic now. All right.
There's
So for those who are just now joining, you need to look at the last name of both, of Matt and myself, right? And if you take the last names and you put them together, we're talking about a pretty major chain here, which then led us to talking a little bit about Hot Topic. Which,
other clothing places. I was telling Matt and James that I was a Hot Topic guy growing up, and then James and I started debating whether or not it was an emo versus goth store. So those of you in the chat that want to weigh in on that, please do. And I was saying that, every time I go to the mall now, which is rare, I like to poke my head in and just see what's going on. And it's definitely different than it was, but the same. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm going to just leave it that.
All right. So before we get into today's Hot Topic intros, right?
Oh, God.
James, you want to go first here?
So my name's James Abercrombie. I am the ISV technology evangelist or developer advocate here at Acronis. I've worn a couple different hats over the years. Really started out as a solutions engineer and kind of built a little bit more knowledge on our cloud integrations, and now I'm working on our cloud integration technology partner program team. But really here to talk a little bit about program, how to make sure that you have programmatically talked and figured out how you're going to deal with a disaster, right? So RPOs and RTOs, and just excited to catch up with you guys for a fun Friday afternoon.
We're happy to have you.
Matt Fish, CEO founder of Fort Mesa. We help service providers own their clients' cybersecurity roadmap. We use vulnerability management, configuration hardening, and governance, risk, and compliance practices to help those MSPs get their customers into the right-sized security plans. Zach?
Hey, everybody. Well, I grew up in the Domino's Pizza executive development ecosystem, into owning my own restaurant franchise for a few years. So I know all there is to know about recovering from disasters, but I don't know if it's going to be exactly the same as a busy Friday pizza night. Now I'm with Fort Mesa. I brought my people and process specialty into the tech world, and am our director of channel sales over there, and loving learning the tech world and bringing what I can to the table.
And this, I have to introduce our I pulled this out off the shelf here in my office. It's been sitting around for 12 years. So just want to show the team colors here.
It's one of my favorite conversations is talking to somebody about whether or not they know about Acronis. We've been around for over 20 years. And, if you know about Acronis, and many people do, chances are you've used TrueImage. That makes the easiest conversation, the easiest icebreaker, because there's so many more solutions than just imaging and backup that we offer as Acronis now. But that's where we started. Acronis TrueImage. We've rebranded it a little bit so that it's Acronis Cyber Protect Home Office. But that's definitely where most of my colleagues know us from.
I feel like I'm getting ready to go to a book fair. If that says anything about my age, I guess. Whoops. But,
all right. Is it time for our next segment here?
Sure.
All right. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
on each of these showcase topics, we like to try to take a little bit of education from the world of compliance into the security conversation. Um, Today, we're looking at CIS Controls version 8. That's from the Center for Internet Security, if you're not familiar with it. And their Control 11 is the category of data recovery. There's a lot of angles you can look at security, a lot of different lenses, and CIS breaks it down into 18 different categories. And data recovery includes 5 individual practices that they say are required to satisfy best practice in cybersecurity data recovery. Now, 4 out of 5 of these things are things that the Center for Internet Security says are required for any business of any size in any industry, no matter what kind of IT they have, to have safe and secure infrastructure. The 5th item here, they recommend for more mature organizations that have dedicated IT, custom business applications, or where there's regulatory or human safety impact. But just I'm going to shoot down through these quick, and we'll stop. There's only five sub-controls here. We'll take a few minutes to note about each of them. 11.1, establish and maintain a data recovery process. When you think about disaster recovery planning, the most important thing is, of course, what's going to happen after a disaster that you can't predict, right? You don't know when it is, you don't know what it's going to be, or what form it might take. So when you're performing your data recovery practices, you need to make sure you have a process that's in place that's sustainable, scalable, predictable. And that's really where the planning comes in. So it's important to establish that, write it down, make sure the processes are going to satisfy your business needs. And so the process comes first, and the technical requirements should really be secondary to that. James, I don't know. I mean, have you run across organizations that you think have a high level of technical acumen, but maybe take some missteps here at the first stage?
Yeah, I think that you know, a lot of companies, and let's take it back to what Zach was mentioning earlier, Domino's, or even going to the mall and looking at all these different stores. I've probably about 75% of these stores don't really have a full on, disaster recovery, plan. So when we're talking about how many companies really do have this, working with the MSPs that I work with, probably 99%, right? But if it's somebody with an IT admin of their own that they've got in-house, they've got something half-baked, something homegrown, right? And that hopefully will meet the need. Now, I think things like CIS really bring to light how much room for improvement there is. And I think that ultimately, with so many different types of frameworks, this is a nice one, having the different levels, the IG 1, 2, 3. But again, maintaining an actual process, not just establishing it, but maintaining it is key. People may have established a process, but they may not update it. And without updating it, it's going to become obsolete after a while, right?
Yeah, so we're about to talk into the more technical things about what you need to be doing, but I think all those things can fall down if the process doesn't make sure that they're continuing to function. So it's someone's job just to make sure all those technical functions that were implemented are continuing to function and functioning the way they should be. But we'll jump into the geeky stuff here. Perform automated backups. That sounds like a simple thing, right? That's the core of data recovery, is having the backup software in place. Data is sort of insidious. It's all over the place in places where maybe you didn't think to take backups. So it's everywhere from your local systems, cloud systems, servers, SaaS applications, right? You've got configurations on firewalls. In some of these locations, it's actually impractical to take a automated backup. And so the important thing is to make sure that, and this is where the process comes in place to begin with, is to establish what the business goals are, right? So that you make sure that you're recording that data in the right place, that you're automating that data backup in the right place, right? And it may not be everywhere, right? But it needs to be in important places in the business so that you can recover the data that's required for the business to operate, right?
When you say automated backup, what's the difference between a backup that's automated, and I mean, I can assume that it's being done by itself. So I guess the question is really, you have an automated backup. What's a manual backup, and what does that process look like?
Well, that'd be the true image thing that I had up on the minute ago, right? That there was a day when that was what people's backups looked like. Oh, I made a change to the server. Let me image that and forget about it for the next year.
Oh, we got a gold image. All right. We got an image of it. It's okay. Well, where is that? And have you tested it? And we were talking earlier before the session even started about the 3-2-1 rule, right? And making sure that you have multiple copies of your data. And, that also comes down to, well, what data is important? Before, back in the day, not even that long ago, but back in the day, it was your server room, everything in that server room. Now that it's extended, out to the cloud, you've got much more than just workloads. You've got containers, right? You've got people, like you said, who want to back up the SaaS applications. I can't tell you how many people want backup of Salesforce, right? So again, defining what is that important information, right, is ever so important.
Back when I was young, important information was, I would have really liked in certain situations to have had a backup save file of certain Pokemon games. So I can see how this would be important. Matt, go ahead and keep going.
Well, my big backup was for music, right? And I had terabytes upon terabytes of music. And I remember one time I synchronized with Apple Music, and Apple Music was like, this is not copywritten. This is not properly downloaded. You can't have this. And it deleted all of my music.
Oh.
Luckily, I had, an external. But that's where I learned about having multiple copies of
You're about to spend some more time on LimeWire for a
minute. We have people asking some pretty geeky technical questions about cadence and we're going to get into that in a few minutes, guys. I want to start here at the standards to just say what the goals should be from a compliance perspective. So we talked about like the easy places, taking a backup. An example of a manual backup could be imaging, Zach, but someplace I see things fall down frequently. Firewall configurations, infrastructure as code out in the cloud. These are problems people have today that they're not good at, right? Those are hard places to take backups from, and we'll talk about it more in a few minutes, but it's important to understand that if you don't have backups of all of the data and information you need to put your business back into action, it's not enough, right? So you can compensate for that with hot sites, warm sites, redundancy. There's other things you can do, and we'll get into that. But basically what we're talking about for backups is automate the backups that are required. What is required is a little more complicated. Let's get into 11.3. Protect the recovery data. This one's actually super hard. And it says that every business of every size should do that. And the simplest version of this is take your data off the computers, make it cold on a piece of external media, and stick it in a safe, right?
Which kind of goes to what Zach was saying earlier. What is a manual backup, right? People used to do tape library, rotations. And sorry to interrupt you there, Matt.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's so there's a lot of different ways you can protect the recovery data, and the way that you need to protect the recovery data is going to depend on where is the data, how protected does it need to be. I was talking to James before this call how I used to have the Iron Mountain guys come to my office, and they'd show up with their little patch on their shoulder, and they'd open their arms like this, and we would give them a copy of all of our data. And they would then leave and whisk that data off to a safe mountain. And it felt good to us because, we know that it's offsite and they have custodial control of it. That's great. That's wonderful. And now with today's mind, I'm thinking, I can't believe we just handed over all of the company's crown jewels to the guy with a patch on his shoulder. And I know you can encrypt backups, and there's tools you can use.
I was going to say, hopefully those disks were encrypted, right?
You talking about patches? You don't trust patches?
I really think I handled an awful lot of data over to strangers back in the day, and I think that's not maybe the best way to protect data these days. But by just handing unencrypted data by the box full. But that definitely is something that I was exposed to. These days, we're talking about transmitting usually to another location that's in a different region in the world. That other region should probably store the backups in a way where they cannot be retrieved with normal administrative credentials. right? Those credentials may be locked away in a safe, right? Literally a safe. And even to write the backups out to that cold site or that offsite location might be something that it's write-only. You can only drop stuff in the slot. You can't delete it. And that would be one way to protect recovery data. There's a lot of ways that can be done these days.
Yeah. Separation
11
is definitely the big one, like you said. I'd say encryption is one that people miss a lot, but now with 2FA encryption, and people are starting to up their game a little bit and make it more of the baseline.
Yeah. And encryption's an important tool here. It's you really can't get through an effective disaster recovery plan these days without some type of encryption tooling to protect those backups. 11.4, and this is the last thing that the Center for Internet Security says is required for every business of any size in any situation, and that is to establish an isolated instance of the recovery data. So what they're talking about is that recovery data is not stored with the thing that could get damaged. It's someplace else. So I just spoke about a channel of this, spoke about a version of this where you'd stick this offsite in another account at another region, right? And that's one way of protecting data. Encryption is another way, but also having that isolated copy that's separate from the server that might get crypto locked or deleted or burned down, right? Any number of things that could happen to a server, or someone could accidentally just do something stupid, right? And then the 11.5, and this is again the last subcontrol for CIS, is testing that recovery data. So this is for organizations that have people that can even do that, right? Because most organizations, if they're small, don't have the skill set in-house to be able to do that. They need someone like an MSP or an outsider to come in and actually do the data restoration. And between times when data restoration's happening or when configurations are being set up, those systems are just chugging along. Someone checks in on them once in a while, but they don't have the staff to do the testing. But where there is an IT department, where there is an MSP in place, where there is customized servers or applications, where the data might be regulated, or where failures of that system could affect human safety, is an absolute requirement to make sure someone is opening up those backups and
making
is the
sure
data
that
in
it's
there.
still good to go.
Yeah. Is the data in there? And
I still have my Charizard. Whew.
Anyone who's been in IT long enough has been in a situation where they open up the backup box and they're not in there.
Unfortunately so. Unfortunately so. And if you haven't, it's only a matter of time, and I'm so sorry.
All right. So that's the compliance view into backup requirements for the CIS, but it's sort of technical. To just zoom out, the label on today's call was RTOs, RPOs, and how to get there. And these are really at the center of disaster recovery planning. And there's something that if you're a technical and you're listening, you actually aren't the person that can answer these questions, right? You need to sit down with your business stakeholders and talk about these things. So RTO, recovery time objective, and RPO, recovery point objective. These are things that an IT engineer or IT support person can affect, can impact. You can enforce that. You can create tools that can achieve those objectives. The things that you do can affect the efficiency or cost, right? But the reality is the business needs to decide how much data can I afford to lose, and how, like, if I'm down, how long can I afford to be down? And if you ask a business owner those questions, sometimes the quick question that will bubble up is, well, I can't lose any data and I can never be down, or can you get me down and get me back up in an hour? And then you need to have the more expansive conversation with them and say, well, there's an exponential curve to cost here, right? If you can only lose 30 seconds of data and you can only have 30 seconds of downtime, we're going to have to 20x your IT spend, right? So you do need to talk through that with customers, but I don't know. Where have you had success, James, when you initiate those discussions? Do you find that people get there quickly? Do you think that this is an iterative or a process that
I guess it depends on who you're talking to, right? If it's the money person or if it's the process person. Ultimately, it needs to make sense to the money person. And when you say 20x their spend, that's not that you've already lost that battle, right? Now, until they get hit, you've lost that battle. They're going to call you back and say they need help after the time occurs. But what I've found is finding the sweet spot. I mean, obviously, 30 seconds of downtime, you need continuous data protection, right? You need something that's going to allow your applications to continue to run in the matter of moments. You need to have, systems on, the standby ready to power on and take over, in case anything were to happen to the originals, whether that be on site, which normally that's what most businesses used to do, right? They had virtual machines that they could run of their SQL servers, their domain controllers, make sure everything's good to go. Now we have cloud infrastructure that you could just back up to and you can fail over to. So it's just about making that process of testing it, right? Acronis has really found the way to make it easier to offer those types of services without increasing that cost so much. And I think having the conversations today, much, much easier than they were 10, 15 years ago.
So Dario asked, what is the cadence for automatic backups? Is this industry dependent? And I would say, yeah, it's industry dependent. It's true that in various industries, businesses that have similar shapes to them have similar needs from the perspective of downtime, recovery point objective. As an example, factories actually have extremely um, uh, small margins of tolerance for downtime. If your factory is down for an hour, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss you can never recover
Yeah,
from.
manufacturing, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, anywhere where there's physical things being moved around that can't be sped up or caught up, right? When those processes are down, that's permanent loss. Other types of businesses, as long as you're back up at the end of the day, maybe you're fine, or by the next day you're fine. With banks, right, you can lose a half a day and be fine, right? In terms of downtime, right? Maybe even an entire day of downtime as a bank would be okay, although it would be painful, right? Now, recovery point objective, from a factory's perspective, they almost don't care if they lose a portion of a day of data because they can always do an inventory or something and figure out what they lost. A bank, on the other hand, um, that day, if they lose a transaction, it's gone, right? So they have to
You can just
journal
shuffle it around a
their
little bit.
database. They have to journal their database changes in real time to an offsite. That's the way that has to work in a bank. So yeah, it is industry dependent, and the cadence really it depends on what you need your recovery point objective to be. If you can't afford to lose more than 4 hours of data, you better be backing up every 4 hours.
I'd say even the
And it,
standard should be an hour, right? Every hour, because there's going to be some critical amount of change. Now, you also need to look at what applications and also what systems, right? It used to be that people were only backing up servers. Now people need to back up their workstations too. Right? If you lose your workstation, it's just like losing your phone. You yourself as a business, if you call yourself a business, right? You are down. You are losing productivity hours. So, again, that's a great thing that Acronis gives you is that you can simply recover utilizing the cloud image. But yeah, no, it's about what is the most important and prioritizing that. And that kind of takes us back to that original control or sub control of establishing and maintaining that, what is it that is really the most important, right? Now maintaining and establishing the entire process, in order to maintain a process, you have to know what that process is and knowing exactly what those workstations are, what the data is, and how it's going to affect you. Because as you said, Matt, a bank, right, they need to journal offsite real time. And the reason being is that if any of that financial data is lost, that's critical. Even for manufacturing or pharmaceutical, right? If they have any type of that PCI data, any of this, personal information that's being deleted or, God forbid, leaked, there's there needs to be a process to remediate.
So I think another thing to consider here is in most businesses, data's not all equal, right?
Hmm.
So it's important that, and this goes in beyond, we were looking at the data recovery controls, but really to do that properly, you also need to do the data inventory controls. You need to inventory all your data, know what it is. You have to classify it and say, this is critical. We can't lose access to this data for more than a few minutes. This data is, it's availability critical data. There might be another set of data that's integrity critical data. We need to trust the content of that data no matter what. We need to know it hasn't been changed, right? We're really concerned if there's changes to this data that we don't lose more than a few seconds, right? These are different types of concerns. And so you do need to classify your data. And probably for most people's workstations, it'd be reasonable to lose some file on the desktop, from that day, right? And people will complain. They will cry and kick and scream that they lost whatever spreadsheet they're working on, but the business will be fine, right? Meanwhile, on some database server, it could be massive reputational damage to even lose, more than an hour of data, right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
Industry dependent, application dependent, situation dependent, and that's why you need to sit down, do your inventorying, have the discussions with your business stakeholders. What can you afford to lose? Like, really, what can you afford to lose? What would destroy the business? What would be so damaging to the business that we need to spend money to prevent that from happening, and resources, right? And let's make sure we put the products in place. And I have to say, I'm dating myself here. The last time I was responsible for a company's backups, SaaS was not really a thing. We're in a troubling space these days, right? Where, the SaaS providers out there, if you've done a good job of vendor selection, their infrastructure is fairly solid. But what happens if someone gets into that infrastructure, right? What happens if someone just hits like the wipe button? That's like gone. Is the SaaS provider gonna give you that restoration? Most of them, the answer is no. Even
Which
the
is
largest
why
ones
people
out
want
there.
backup of Salesforce, right? I mean, even if
Yeah.
they could provide it, it's the peace of mind of knowing that you have everything that you need in the case of a disaster.
Yeah. So that's backups. There's the
James, you were
other.
talking a lot about processes. Early on, I joked about having experienced plenty of disasters in my day, coming from the food industry, right? So, one thing that I thought was organizations may not be familiar with the processes around disaster recovery for data, but everybody's familiar with processes around disaster and intended disaster recovery. From a young age, everybody's experienced tornado drills or fire drills. Those are forms of disaster preparedness and planning. In the restaurant industry, getting crushed by a big rush, right? Those with that experience understand how to be prepared, what to do when it happens. Matt, you had a tree hit your house. That's a disaster. Call the insurance, handling electricity. So when paralleling the two, it may be easier to have those conversations, but let's talk about process for cyber disaster recovery, because obviously that's the first place you need to start, is having a plan and knowing how to execute it.
Yeah. So the backups are sort of like this critical pillar you need to have in your disaster recovery, right? Because you just have to presume that whatever data you have is, it can't be ultimately protected. There's always something that can happen to it, right? So you need copies of it. You need to put those copies in places, where you feel like if the disaster struck here, it wouldn't strike there. There is a lot of formalized guidance around that, but another thing people fall down on and is this process piece. In small companies, um, engineers, they put the backups in place, right? And sometimes they use sophisticated products, and there's multiple servers and shadow copies and replication sites, and then they configure everything, and they pat themselves on the back and say, aren't I great? This is amazing. And then they go on vacation. And they say, don't worry, you're all set. But the reality is, if that business can't afford to be down for 3 days and you're on vacation, like, or you're
You're
sleeping,
driving
or you
home.
went to a party, right? Like, who's going to be taking care of that? So part of the process here, Zach, is to make sure that we have who's going to do what in what situation, right? Ideally, it's written down. Um, also, ideally, the people that are involved in that have sat at a table and discussed it, right? They've done the tabletop and they said, well, if this happens, oh, I would do that and you would do this. Well, what happens if you're over there? That tabletopping is really important, and through a process like that, you can then refine and create these processes which you can then execute and test out when maybe not so disastrous things happen. You can test these things. People ask for file restores. Can we use that as an opportunity to actually exercise these muscles, right?
And you should. I mean, that then brings you to 11.5, right? And that's testing the backup, whether that be a full on or just a granular. Now, I think back when I first started, it was, a yearly recovery, scenario, and normally would happen during a vacation time, so that, the poor tech had to work when nobody else was working, right? And hopefully they were able to get the recovery to work, because otherwise, people were going to be really angry when they got back to the office, after their fun, holiday. If you make that more often, and you start testing things granularly,
Normalize
right?
it.
Yeah, make it the baseline, right? Then
Make
you
it
don't
a process.
even better. Make it a process, build it into your process, love the process, grow the process. It makes it less full of heartburn, if you will. It's kind of like security awareness training, right? Nobody wants to do it, but we know we need to.
Yeah.
Or going to the gym. If you do it regularly, it's not miserable. But if you haven't done it in a year and then you try to go, your disaster recovery planning tabletop's probably not going to be fun.
Yeah, and this isn't as simple as restoring data, right? Like you may have like cold backups someplace, but what happens if they're in an application stack across like 12 systems that all need to somehow be interlinked with each other, and there's VPNs, right? And there's data moving back and forth and it's flying around, and you have to like rebuild the castle. It's like, great, we got the data, we've restored it to the database servers, the file servers are good, and now we have to rebuild this enormous city. And how fast can you do that? And do you have the people required to do that? Or can you get them on call? Do they know that they're on call for this? And if you're on vacation, does someone else know they're on call for this? And above and beyond that, I think, Zach, you just mentioned that, this might be part of a greater cyber impact moment. It may not be a natural disaster like building burned down. There may be an actual threat actor involved. And in that case, this disaster recovery planning is happening parallel to, at the same time as an active incident. And so making sure that those incident response plans are also in place, and that the disaster recovery plans include, we're going to coordinate with the incident response team, which better be a separate team, because they've got a headache right now. They could actively be fighting off an attacker. Right?
Well, there's the teams and there are the plans, right? So if you make a disaster recovery plan, you should consider how it's going to impact on the different types of disasters. And if your plans aren't correlating with each other, you're going to set yourself up for a bad time.
So James, do you guys work with incident response workflowing, or you're really focused on this this recovery value chain? Tell me about the areas that you're familiar with.
Yeah, so we're not just disaster recovery and backup, right? We also offer security. Now, with that being said, we have a lot of integrations that allow for some of that response management to happen. Acronis has just recently released some EDR and MDR functionalities, but again, really in this ever-changing landscape, what we're looking to do is partner with all technologies so that they can be leveraged from within our platform, which will allow for all of these incident response planning, workflows or, triggering or engagements to actually be done from within the Acronis console.
Yeah, and that's important, because the reality is no one runs in a homogeneous technical system, right?
No, you can't put all your ducks in one line, right?
It's not even possible, right?
No.
As much as I love lining up ducks.
So the disaster recovery stuff needs to get put in place, but then you need to know that you can actually work with it in not just a disaster, but in the middle of an incident, right?
Yeah.
Like what happens if your disaster recovery plan is like, okay, we'll just upload this thing over the internet, but the incident happens to take down your internet because
your internet's down. I grew up in Ashburn, Virginia, and somebody just typed in the wrong line of code and took down literally AOL, Facebook, Yahoo. Everybody was down for hours. Nobody knew what was going on. So It's just a matter of time before you have to deal with one of these incidents.
So, I usually throw it up before now, but I'm just going to remind everyone that we're here to take questions, and we've got all these chat links streaming across our screen right now. So this is a good opportunity for everyone watching. If you have a question about disaster recovery planning, or how to sell it, or how to pack it, or what to do in what situation, or I have this situation and this is a head scratcher. Leave us some notes. Zach, what do you have to add there?
Yeah, I'll start while everybody starts filing those questions in. I think, we have RPOs and what was it, Matt? Remind me. What are the goals?
RPOs and RTOs, recovery point objective, recovery time objective.
Yeah,
So
how much time you can lose versus, how quick it needs to be back up and running.
let's give everyone. So we kind of talked about how different industries are going to have different goals. Let's give some high level goals for the people to kind of answer that question, and with the caveat of consider yourself, consider where you're at and what you're dealing with. Because I think it might be nice to give some perspective there, and then maybe we can do the same for the other one. And
All right,
questions that are flowing.
I'm going to start with the top two most critical examples of both recovery point objective and recovery time objective I've ever heard of. And that is, of course, our securities exchanges around the world, the stock indexes, right? There are literal shocks that ripple through the economy when we have problems with these technical systems. People lose their jobs. Whole countries grind to a halt when there's a problem with these things. They have some of the most demanding requirements. The other one I see is, of course, air traffic control and aerospace, right? Like what happens if the computers in a modern contemporary jet fail in flight, right?
Yeah, that's terrifying. I'm on planes too much for that to be a thought. Let's not
or
let's
if
not go
air
there.
traffic control goes down, which that happened sort of recently on the East Coast. I'm not sure I ever got the full story there, or if anyone got the full story there. But these are complicated systems, right? Things happen, and so they have to put in so many redundancies there to make sure that those systems are, they have acceptable downtime per year measured in seconds, right, for those systems. So
let's talk about Las Vegas and the slots going down.
Yeah, that's a big one. How much are they losing a day? Like 20 million a day, 10 million a day, something like that?
Something insane. It's unfathomable. But the fact is that is what needs to be taken into regard when you're doing these types of incident response planning. Whether or not you're a high profile business like this or not, you're a business, right? You are there to make a revenue. And if you are not functional as a business, you are losing out on revenue. Do you know what that revenue is? If you don't, you need to calculate it, and you'll figure out what your spend needs to be.
We've got a couple more questions here. This one's a product question, James, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm hoping you can help us.
Yeah. So, question being, can Acronis work more on disaster recovery months, at least for 6 months or a year? So I'm going to use Florida as an example here, because I've got a couple buddies in Florida who run.
They love to be the example, man.
Yeah, Florida man, right? Or Florida data, as we will. So they get a lot of hurricanes, and the fact is that if you have local data that is susceptible to being compromised by either a threat actor or, say, a flood or electrical outages, what do you do, right? And that's where Acronis does help you, right? So we talked a little bit about having multiple copies, having isolated copies, making sure that those copies are protected. Acronis allows you to have that local backup as well as that offsite backup, whether it be in the Acronis cloud or in some other cloud, maybe Azure or GCP, wherever you'd like. But the benefit of going to the Acronis cloud is that we actually have infrastructure that you can fail over to. So if you'd like, 6 months out of the year, you can pay for an advanced disaster recovery license that would allow you to have this automated failover to the disaster recovery infrastructure in one of our 53 data centers, right? So We have
It's a lot
workbooks
of
that you
data
can
centers.
create. Yeah, we're global,
Just
right?
put that
So
in there on the low. I
yeah,
noticed.
yeah.
You
Just
thought I
and
wasn't
we're
going
going
to see
every
Well,
it.
single day, my friend.
I
So
saw.
that is really important to have another facility to be able to fail over to. I remember, we're talking about Florida, right?
mhm.
Some of us may know about Terramark. They're down there. They've got this facility down in Florida. There was a hurricane a few years ago. This data center was supposedly unkillable. It had like tier 4 whatever redundancies, all the backup things you could possibly think of, and of course a big chunk of federal government systems were plunked down in the data center with no offsite failovers. And the storm hit, took out the unkillable data center and all of the federal systems. Now, it didn't permanently cripple our government. There were plans in place to react to situations like that, but pieces of our government were down. Literally, there were parts of agencies that just couldn't function until they untangled that. So, um, yeah, having a place to actually recover that's sort of contained and manicured for you, it's pretty critical having that warm site or hot site available or cold site with some capacity, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and not having to be the sole proprietor maintaining it, right? And everything that Acronis is dabbling and perfecting and getting into today has been a direct result of what we have found our partners needs to be, right? As you mentioned earlier, it was True Image, right? You brought your own storage, you maintained your own storage. Well, we found that as data grew and grew and grew, that's not really exactly what most MSPs want to do. They don't want to manage tons and tons of storage, petabytes, zettabytes. They want to offload that, right? So we got into the storage game, right? As I said, we've got 53 data centers across the globe, and then we found that threat actors were going after those backups. So how do you secure those backups, right? So we also have an active protection IP, which actually, as we're tracking the block level changes to track the and commit the backup, we can revert any changes that have been created or made by any processes that may be unbeknown, right? So the idea here is that instead of something being able to impact your backups, we can simply revert any of those changes and put it into an audit log for discovery later.
Awesome.
We've got Brad Frazier here asking about the difference between disaster recovery and incident response.
Hey, Brad.
So, uh, you know, there's another couple acronyms here that sometimes get tangled up: business continuity and
Mm-hmm.
disaster recovery, and that one's confusing even for me, being a credentialed expert on the subject, because the line is blurry.
Well, I think business
Um,
continuity is what we've been talking about. Is like
yeah,
how much time can you really afford to lose, right? And in business continuity is how do we maintain a business, moving forward, if something were to happen. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with incident response, right? How do you handle those issues? But then disaster recovery is what is the actual action, right? So incident response would be like playbook, DR would be the actual trigger. No.
yeah. I mean, the incidents are sometimes like disaster oriented, but incidents are also routine things that aren't necessarily disasters, right? And the incident could be as simple as someone lost their phone on a bus. An incident could be someone got locked out of an account. An incident could be someone received a file that they know it's on their system. They're not sure if they're infected or not, but they know that this file doesn't look right and they need someone to look at it. Please help me.
Or
That
it's
could
just
be an
in their
incident.
email, right?
Yeah,
And
it's just in
they
their email. That could be an incident. And so it's the incident response's job to triage that and understand what the impact is and have a playbook for it in any situation and declare a disaster if one needs to be declared. It would be the incident responder's job to say, oh, we're in a disaster. And they would wake up the disaster team and they'd make all the phone calls required. And that's incident response's job.
it's like the operator, right?
Yeah.
I've got
But
what might be seen as a goofy question, but what's the most important piece of recovering from a disaster? Like if you only could do one of the things, and I
Oh,
guess it's contingent upon industry.
yeah, that's
I
industry.
this is easy. Remain calm. It is. I have
That
been
came
in
through with the
those.
clutch answer. I like it.
Yeah, I've been in those
42.
situations. It is really easy to. You're already in a disaster to compound the issue, right? It is very, very easy. That's why it's important to have those playbooks in advance that hopefully you've already stressed out a little bit or talked through so that you don't have to do the thinking in the moment. But if you do have to do the thinking in the moment, slow down. Slow down. Ask people questions. Don't rush. That's my number one and through three, I think.
I think having the plan is the most critical, like you said. In what you said, slow down. That resonates with me because I was grocery shopping yesterday. I had a list. And I could go through the list and I know exactly what I need. But then I remembered there was, an item that I should probably get, but I had a list, so I stuck to the list. Yeah. So it was nice to be able to stick to the list because although there were some other things, other projects that could take priority for me. I realized no. This is procedure. You got to stick to procedure, and we were able to deliver under budget.
There you go. Came in with some coupons to the grocery store.
We've got Robbie here with the very succinct definition of all the things we were just talking about, and yeah, he's exactly right. He must be looking at the same textbooks that I've been studying. But it's hard to it's easy to say these are the definitions when you actually have to translate this into practice. It gets a lot more confusing when you start talking about situations and playbooks and is that BC or is that IR or is that it's blurry. It's important to understand the spirit of what you're trying to achieve though, and just make sure the right emphasis is put in place. We got a few minutes left here. Zach, I know, you come from outside this cyber assurance space. You're an outsider who used to buy from MSPs, have to operate. You were the business owner impacted by these failures. So this conversation, what questions are you left with as the outsider?
Well, what I would be asking my service provider if I was. So I'll actually be totally honest. I took over a franchise that did not do a good job with their tech. The stores had very old tech. We would have monitors that would go down. We would have, you would have the things go wrong that you would have go wrong if you had old tech. I remember one day specifically, we had on a make line, you'll have a monitor in the front and a monitor in the back. It's an efficiency thing, so everybody can see what the heck you're doing. And we had both of the damn monitors go down. So you can imagine, it slows down operations. If you slow down operations in food, what happens? People don't get their food faster. Are those people happy? No.
Especially not Domino's customers.
Well, I didn't say that, you did, but especially
I know this line that you're talking about, this assembly line. I know it so well. I've worked it before. I know that monitor.
Yeah? I didn't. We'll have to talk more about that. But yeah, so both screens are down, and my experience is those poor folks in the store having to deal with angry people not being able to do their job. It's not going to go away anytime soon because it's not like you either have to deal with the angry people or make the food. So more problems are mounting. I mean, I could imagine my question if I was asking my MSPs, how are you going to make sure that I don't have to deal with that? How are you going to make sure that I'm going to be in a situation where I can focus on training and developing my team instead of calming people down? That's where my thoughts are. How can I get back to growing my business instead of dealing with a disaster? That's where my head would be. And I don't know if I succinctly answered the question, but
this is a good dovetail with Jeremy's question here. He asks, how do you calculate the RPO if you don't have issues that you can use as examples? And I would say, as an engineer, you cannot calculate the RPO. It is not your job. It is the business owner's job. Someone in operations in that business will tell you exactly how much data they can afford to lose and how much they can't afford to lose. They will tell you, and you will say, I have just the solution for you. Or maybe you'll have to think about it for a while and come back and say, I have just the solution for you, and here's how much it costs. But I don't think engineers can decide these things.
If you're supervisors, if you're an engineer, even if you're the CTO, and your board or your whatever is asking you to explicitly make that decision, they're putting you in a position to fail. It is a decision that needs to be made with consideration from all aspects of the business and the different arms of the business. And if you're just a CTO, or if you're just an engineer, or if you're just a finance guy, or if you're not taking into account the whole puzzle, you're going to cook it wrong. The whole I butchered that analogy, but you get what
I get what you're saying. I mean, it's not a siloed approach, right? It's not just one person who, now, I mean, if you're a lean company, obviously it may be a little bit more siloed than others, but I think ultimately when you're looking at, the RPO, how much data can you afford to lose or have to recreate, right? How many engineers do you have, or how many resources? Let's take engineer out of the equation. How many resources are you paying that utilize that data, right?
Great. That's a great way to look at it.
And then how much is their salary? What is their hourly rate? And then tell me, for them to have to go in and do double the work, is that not something that you can't create a metric on?
Yeah, at a bare minimum, right? But sometimes losing data costs a lot more than
exponentially more than just that. But that's why you can't silo it, right? Because there may be one person who can give you that information, and another person who can give you, different variables.
Right. And there's this technique. This is really geeky, guys. There's this technique called the Delphi method, where you sit down at a table, and you take stakeholders from all over an organization. You take the mailroom guy and the CEO, and you have a diversity intentionally, not just the management team. You take a diversity of viewpoints, and you ask a question. You have a question like this: how much time can we afford to lose? And everyone writes down anonymously on pieces of paper, and then a moderator compiles the list. And the reason you need to use methods like that is the CEO is obviously going to have the most powerful voice in the room, but he doesn't know anything. He's got like 5 people he talks to, and he doesn't do anything.
So
right?
We've talked more about Domino's in this one than any of the rest of them, but this was Domino's this is their theory around the development of their executive development program that I went through. And it was, you can't make decisions at the top level if you don't have people who have experienced the operation. So it was learning operations and the experience of each position, so that when you go and make a decision on the new product rollout, you're not doing something that seems great up here, but adds, time in a way that damages the business at a lower level.
So Samuel just asked one of my favorite questions. I circle back around to this topic a lot. How do you have the security conversation with the customer? So if you're an MSP, you probably have heard of this acronym QBR, Quarterly Business Review. Sometimes we call these account reviews, technical account reviews. They don't need to be quarterly. They don't need to be technical. The intent here is that you sit down with your customer and you have a technology conversation that's not technical. You talk to them about their business and what their business needs are and how technology affects or impacts that. And if you start that conversation and you talk about all areas of their business, RPO and RTO is in that context. And I don't think you sit down and you have an RPO, RTO conversation. I think you sit down with your customer on a regular basis and you talk to them about what's important to their business. And RPO and RTO is part of that conversation.
Yeah. And if we're talking about, how to really start those conversations, talk about what's happening in the world today, right? Talk about what's happening to other businesses that may be similar to them and may not be similar to them. Because the fact is that they're a target. Everybody's a target at this point, whether it be human error or a threat actor, right? There's always a factor at play. And if they think that they are not susceptible to this, that's the conversation starter, right? It's like, why do you feel that way? And how have you planned to not have that issue, right? Because great, you don't want to invest in more, disaster recovery planning. I understand, but what's your incident response plan? What does this look like for you today? Because
how are you going to protect yourself?
Yeah. And talk to them about those examples that people they know that seem like them. Right? Not some other business that doesn't seem like them. Talk to them about a business like them and what's happened and what is happening and what could happen, and ask them how that situation would affect them, right?
And I'd take a stab at that answer, and I would say there's nothing that your clients understand more than their specific situation. And if you're a vendor talking to MSPs, there's nothing those MSPs should understand more than their client's perspective. So figure out what it is that your client does and talk to them in terms of what it is they're going to do and what it is that's going to happen. Don't talk to them in terms of what the tools do, what the tools are. They don't care if it's a hammer or if it's a spaceship. All they care is whether or not their potentially angry general manager has screens to look at, or whether or not people's water's safe. Those are the things that matter to that end client. So talk about it in terms of those things happening. And then what tools you use to do the job, man. Nobody really cares. We care because we're
MSPs care. We MSPs
yeah, the
care, but the end
MSPs
client.
care, and it makes your life easier, right? The tool feels good for the MSP because it's either harder or easier to do your job, but it shouldn't change the end result to the client, and they definitely shouldn't be thinking about it whether or not the end result is different.
So we're almost at the top of the hours, guys. I feel like we could have done a 2-hour section on RPOs.
Well, we may just have to do another one. It's such a great combo.
Let's just talk about what's going on in Acronis right now. James, do you have anything you want to share?
Yeah,
and first of all, wait, let's back up. For people who don't know who Acronis is, or they haven't used anything since the version 9 of TrueImage, who is Acronis now?
Yeah, so we've been around for 20 plus years. Again, we started out as a backup, and we've kind of morphed into multiple different areas. When I say morphed, I mean, again, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Everything that we do today has been a direct result of our partners' needs, right? So we do backup, we do disaster recovery, we do cybersecurity, whether that be email security, whether it be antivirus, whether it be anti-phishing, whether it be vulnerability assessment, patch management, remote service, access. We're just released our MDR and our EDR. We have remote monitoring and management functionalities. We have professional service automation functionality.
Can I ask you a different question?
Yeah.
What don't you guys do?
Firewall. Firewall. That's what we don't do.
You had that ready.
Yeah, he's answered.
Because somebody asked me what we do. Normally, that's kind of how I answer it, Zach. It's it's not really what we do; it's what we don't do. And then my other favorite question is, who's your biggest competitor? And it's like nobody, really nobody, because nobody does what we do. Other people do things that we do for sure, but nobody else brings the ease of use to the managed service provider community that Acronis does, because we partner with all technologies to make it so that you can leverage your stack from one console, right? So whether that be deployment, whether that be, ticketing, whether that be monitoring, whether that be, protection or remediation, or again, like you were mentioning, incident response planning, right? We are partnering with everybody so that we can make it easier for the partner to meet and exceed their client's needs. Matt, you mentioned earlier, the client doesn't really care, what they're using. They just care that they're able to, get up and running. They need to know that they have that backup, right? Not backup of like my data, but that I have somebody that I can count on, I can call, or Zach, in your case, somebody who we can yell at, right? And say, this needs to be fixed.
Yes, fix.
So strong credentials in the industry. You guys have been around for a while. You've built a lot of brand value and technical value in the space. Committed to the channel. What's the latest, greatest, newest thing that you can talk about?
The latest, greatest, newest thing would be our cyber app standard. So we are releasing the cyber app platform next month. We'll have a big release launch event. It'll be virtual. You guys are all invited, but it'll be on October 24th, and you'll see a little bit more information about it as the next weeks come out. But cyber app is it's a declarative low-code UI builder that allows for all technologies, all solution vendors to build a seamless integration with the Acronis cyber platform, right? So that you can be a functionality within my console without having to write any code, right? So anybody who is a service vendor, service provider, integrator, services integrator, come to this event, learn a little bit more about how we can get you interested in building on the cyber app standard.
So I don't We have time for one more question, and James, I don't know, is this one that you can answer? Should I put this up on the screen?
Let's see it. What is it?
All right, I can just bring it up there. I'm not sure if you can see that. So,
How do I shift a customer who's been using Veeam to Acronis? Really good question. So it depends on what all they're doing, right? Ultimately, what I would do is I install the Acronis agent, back it up, and then delete your Veeam data. Now, there's a couple different methods. If you're utilizing a PSA and an RMM, we integrate with all the top ones, such as ConnectWise and Datto and Kaseya and Ninja. And really, it makes it easy for that Acronis agent to be deployed. And the best thing about Acronis, when I joined Acronis, the selling factor for me 6 years ago was that you don't have to reboot the system before you can start doing backups, right? And that's huge for a solutions engineer, because that makes a proof of concept butter. So that also makes it easier for the MSP. So again, if we're talking about like say Datto, right, I would say, well, you can utilize the Datto RMM that you're already using today, and replace that with the Acronis agent utilizing the Datto RMM, and then you can uninstall the Datto agent. Same thing for Veeam, really. So with Veeam, you've got a bunch of different solutions that they tack on for you, and ultimately you have to manage them independently. You should be able to reach out to an Acronis advisor, and they'll walk you through the process of getting onboarded with Acronis and make it as simple as possible for you. We'll even tell you who to work with.
Awesome. Great. So I'll just do our quick plug here. So look, Fort Mesa is in the channel to help service providers of all types, especially MSPs, own their client's cybersecurity roadmap. We do that with vulnerability management, configuration hardening, and we support the governance, risk, and compliance processes, risk assessment, gap analysis, evidencing. We help you introduce what security your customer has, what they need according to their industry, regulatory impact, project management, all the way through. And then evidence it at completion. So that's where we are on the market. I'm very excited that James could join us today. And Zach, you were a little, maybe a little too not generous enough to explain that you don't just come from restaurants. You're also a student of computer science, and you're our chief cheerleader in the channel for all of our channel partners. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I'll add in the same way that I kind of mentioned when you were talking about that tabletopping exercise where you bring in all the different folks, and I mentioned that I was given that education through my development program to be able to have perspective from the top and the bottom, and I don't give myself enough credit yet because I'm still actively working through my my master's program in computer science with an emphasis on GRC. So I don't feel, I'll get there in terms of giving myself credit, but I want to finish. You know what I mean?
That's like me saying that I don't have a beard because it's not as long as ZZ Top's.
Valid. Fair enough.
We're all learning every day. You wanna dial us out here?
Yeah, let's do the thing. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. This is going to conclude another Friday at the MSP Cyber Roundtable. Be sure to like us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube for more educational content. James, thank you so much for coming, man. This was awesome to have you. Great conversation. Glad we were able to go over disaster recovery planning. Everybody, be sure to come back next week where we're going to have Teddy and Michael from Shield to have a debate with us about what the difference between penetration testing and vulnerability management is. So it should be a fun conversation, and we look forward to having everybody back next week. Thanks, guys.
Take care.